I am talking about Marxism. So let's start. First, key objectives. In this presentation, we see first what is a Marxism, then understanding of Marxism, historical materialism, class struggle, why is Marxism important, and some example that Marxism goes to the movies. So let's start. What is a Marxism? Marxism is a social, political, and economic philosophy named after Karl Marx. It examines the effect of capitalism on labor, productivity, and economic development and argues for a worker revolution to overturn capitalism in favor of communism. Marxism posits that the struggle between social classes and the specifically between the capitalist and the proletariat or workers define economic relations in a capitalist economy and will inevitably lead to revolutionary communism. So, understanding of Marxism, Marxism is a both a social and political theory, which encompass Marxist class conflict theory and Marxism economics. Marxism was the first publicly formulated in the 1848 pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which lays out the theory of class struggle and revolution. What is the historical materialism? So, in 1859, in the preface to the a contribution to the critique of political economy, Marx wrote that the hypothesis that had served him as the basis for his analysis of society could be briefly formulated as follows. So, what is Karl Marx said? Here I quoted that in the social production that men carry on, they enter into definite relations that are indexable and independent of their will, relation of production which correspond to a definite stage of development of their material forces of production. So, in simple terms, what is a historical materialism? Marx discovered that throughout the history of human progress, society has taken many different forms and adjusted itself constantly. But he identify a certain defining aspect that governed how different society were structured: class and its relation to the means of production, and he found that the struggle between the class occurred all throughout history. This approach is called a historical materialism. Then class struggle. So, according to Marx, society has always been divided into the haves and have not, and these two classes have always fought each other. I give you one example. We all about Bollywood. We all are aware about Bollywood movies. So one movie is Diwar, when Amitabh Bachchan and Sashi Kapoor talk about they. Yes, so one conversation about that when Amitabh Bachchan said that आज मेरे पास गाड़ी है, बंगला है, and other things, and Sashi Kapoor said that मेरे पास माँ है. So this is not our concern, but have not or have. When Amitabh said that I have a bungalows, gadis and monies and things, so rich people like business class people and middle class people. So this is talk about class struggle. So Marx theories on how class conflict would play out in a capitalist system. So we in these two classes there. First one, business and owners who control the means of production, and then second one is workers, middle class people. So whose labor transform raw commodity into valuable economic goods. So, according to Marx, whoever owned the means of production has always controlled the government and society. So there are some elements that capitalist society that ordinary laborers who do not own means of production, such as the factories, buildings, and materials, have little power in the capitalist economic system. Workers are also readily replaceable in periods of high employment and further devaluing their perceived worth. So, to maximize profits, business owners have an incentive to get the most work out of their laborers while paying them the lowest possible wages. This creates an unfair imbalance between owners and the laborers, whose work they exploit for their own gain. So, because workers have little personal stake in the process of production, Marx believed they would become alienated from it. So ultimately, the inherent inequalities and exploitative economic relations between these two classes will lead to revolution in which the working class rebels against the business class people and control of the means of production and abolish the capitalism. Thus, Marx thought that the capitalist system inherently contained the seeds of own destruction. The alienation and exploitation of the proletariat that are fundamental of capitalism relation would inevitably drives to working class to rebel against the working business class people. Then why is Marxism important? So in the mid 19th century, Marxism helped to consolidate, inspire, and radicalize elements of the labor and socialist movement in Western Europe. And it was later the basic of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism. The revolutionary doctrines developed by Vladimir Lenin in Russia and Mao Zedong in China, respectively. It also inspired a more moderate from socialism in Germany, the precure of modern social democracy. Now move forward that Marxism goes to the movies. So in the movies, why Marxism is important and uh, so film developed in the content of urbanization, spreading industrialization, mass communication, and mass culture. The latter benefits from the decades of labor struggles that had gradually driven down the length of the working day week and thus expand the scope for various culture activities. So Marx had argued that the movement from a class existing in itself without self-consciousness of its distinct class interest to a class for itself was absolutely crucial if it was to become a political uh, agent capable of leading the fight of social change. The prospect of that film might help the proletariat achieve such a degree of class consciousness and self-awareness was not outlanding in a pre-Hollywood American cinema. So we have a take one example of Charlie Chaplin movie. We all are aware about it modern times. So Charlie Chaplin, the tramp in this movie, Charlie Chaplin's the tramp already being forgetted, sorry, forged in the mid-teens, embodies this popular recognition of class inclusion and exclusion. So in this movie, bosses, the rich in general, policemen, politicians, the courts, landlords, government official, and such like were frankly so greedy, petty, corrupt, and vain and vindictive. So these are some frame from this movie that looming presence of the powerful people and powerlessness of the poor people. So Chaplin dismissed this the concept in a beautiful and hilarious moment few minutes into the film that another worker relieves the tramp from his duties and he is able to leave the assembly line for a few moments. He walked down a hallway and punches a time clock and enter a bathroom. Here we see that the tramp goes inside, light up a cigarette and sit down on the sink to take short break, and then suddenly on a screen behind him and he yelled at the tramp to quiet stalling, get back to work. So not only are the employees not paid for their bathroom breaks, but they are also punished if they use those breaks in an unauthorized, unauthorized way. Then in this second slide, we see that how Charlie Chaplin in his movie support to communism and Marxism, that communism and workers' right, and then second frame mechanization of human. Is it visible?
Hello, Riddhi, unmute your mic.
So in this in this movie, since Charlie Chaplin eating machine, how Charlie Chaplin describe us and support to Marxism, and also criticize capitalism. This scene is very funniest, and sequence again the underline this concept of the capitalist the control of the labor time. A group of a salesmen visit the presidents to pitch a product called the below feeding machine. So a practical device which automatically feeds your men while at work. Don't stop for lunch, be ahead of your competitors. The below feeding machine will eliminate the lunch hour, increase the production and decrease your overhead. They try to machine out on the tramp, and the thing rather violent and resulting in one of the better known sequence in Chaplin's overview. At the end of the demonstration, we see that president reject the machine because it isn't practical. After all, the productivity gained by elimination of the lunch hour is worthless if the worker is president, not the tramp, who decide the practically of the lunch machine. So, as Marx says, from the instant he stepped into the workshop, the use value of his labor power and therefore also its use, which is labor, belong to the capitalist. These are some references, and thank you.